Suddenly nothing seems to make sense anymore. People drift away, plans collapse, and even your own body begins to react in strange, unexplainable ways. It feels as if life is dismantling everything you thought was stable. But what if this isn't chaos or bad luck? What if the universe is actually preparing you for something extraordinary? A quantum jump, a real shift in your line of reality. In this journey, you'll discover the 10 scientific and energetic signs that reveal you're on the verge of that leap, and how chaos is never destruction. It's the final test before expansion. It starts quietly. At first, you just feel a vague uneasiness, like a subtle static behind the music of your everyday life. The coffee that once centered you tastes flat. The same faces, the same places, begin to blur into a single gray frequency. You keep doing what you've always done, yet something inside you whispers that it no longer fits. What you're sensing is not failure or boredom. It's the quantum field pressing against the edges of your familiar reality. Every comfort zone has a frequency. It's not emotional, it's informational. It carries the memories, habits, and energetic signatures of who you have been up to this moment. But when your consciousness starts resonating with a higher potential, the old frequency begins to distort. That distortion feels like discomfort. What was once easy becomes irritating. What once made sense now feels forced. The field is inviting you to tune differently, and your nervous system reads that invitation as tension. This is why people often confuse awakening with crisis. The mind tries to interpret vibrational change as danger. It's built to protect continuity, not transformation. So when the quantum field begins reorganizing your path, your psyche resists, searching for a reason, any reason, to stay the same. You might call it stress, exhaustion, or even meaninglessness, but if you could measure the energy behind it, you'd see a pattern forming, coherence collapsing in one spectrum, expanding in another. Notice how your body reacts during this stage. The restlessness in your chest, the sudden lack of satisfaction, the urge to make radical decisions without knowing why, these are physiological signatures of recalibration. Your cells respond to shifts in electromagnetic information long before your intellect does. The body always knows first. So when you feel trapped in monotony, it's not a punishment, it's a prelude. The familiar is dissolving to make room for a frequency that matches your next level of awareness. The paradox is that the comfort zone collapses precisely when things appear to be fine. The job still pays, the relationship still works on paper. Yet a deeper intelligence within you starts questioning the contract you've signed with your old self. That's the moment the universe introduces friction, not to hurt you, but to increase the signal-to-noise ratio in your consciousness. Friction is the field's way of asking, are you ready to observe differently? If you resist, the discomfort grows louder. Life begins to glitch, small misalignments, repeated frustrations, invisible walls where flow used to be. That's the feedback loop of resistance. You're still emitting the old frequency, while life is already broadcasting the new one. When both overlap, interference patterns appear. They look like chaos, but they're actually proof that the jump is near. In quantum language, this is a decoherence phase, the moment when one probability line starts to lose stability while another becomes more defined. The key is observation without panic. Don't rush to fix what's dissolving. Observe it like a scientist who has just discovered a new variable in an experiment. Instead of asking, "Whoa, what's wrong with me?" ask, "What is this energy trying to reorganize?" This question shifts your perspective from victim to participant. You stop reacting to discomfort as a threat and begin translating it as data. In that state of observation, new intuitions start to surface, small impulses, subtle nudges toward change. Follow them gently. You're not supposed to leap yet. You're supposed to notice. Every time you acknowledge discomfort without escaping it, the quantum field receives a clear signal. Consciousness is stabilizing in a higher coherence. That's when coincidences begin to multiply, preparing the next phase of reorganization. Because once the comfort zone collapses, the universe doesn't stop at subtle signs. It begins to rearrange everything that's built upon the old vibration. Relationships shift, opportunities pause, and structures you relied on start to move out of alignment. It might feel as if life itself is disassembling around you, but the field never removes without replacing. What leaves creates the vacuum through which the next reality line will flow. And that's when the real test begins, when the things you most want start slipping away, not because you're losing them, but because they can't cross into the next frequency. It usually begins the moment you start surrendering to change. Just as you begin to accept that your comfort zone is collapsing, something or someone unexpectedly leaves. A relationship that once felt unshakable suddenly fades into silence. A career path that seemed secure takes an abrupt turn. Plans dissolve, people withdraw, opportunities stall for no visible reason. It feels personal, almost targeted, as if the universe is dismantling the structure of your life piece by piece. But what's really happening is a reorganization in the quantum field. In physics, there's a concept called state collapse. When an observation changes, the previous probability ceases to exist. Reality can't hold two dominant vibrations at once. One has to give way to the next. The same principle applies to your life. Every bond, every habit, every situation carries a frequency. When your internal vibration shifts, the external configurations that no longer match that frequency begin to fall away. It looks like loss, but it's really the collapse of the old state. Most people try to fight this phase. They double down on control, call everyone back, rewrite plans, or try to patch holes that were never meant to be fixed. But the more you cling to what's leaving, the more resistance you create in the energetic field. And resistance delays reorganization. The truth is that nothing aligned with your future self can be lost. What disappears now is only what your next version cannot sustain. The universe does not destroy, it recalibrates. Consider how a sculptor approaches a block of marble. Each strike of the chisel seems destructive, yet every piece that falls away reveals form, precision, and intention. Life is performing the same artistry on you. The job that vanished, the friendship that ended, the sudden distance you can't explain, all are fragments of marble being removed to expose the new shape beneath. From the outside, it looks like loss. From the inside, it's refinement. During this period, your nervous system may interpret absence as danger. You might feel as if the ground beneath you has dissolved, as though some invisible hand pulled stability away. But pay attention to the silence that follows each ending. Inside that stillness, new instructions begin to emerge. Every loss carries data. Each disappearance reveals the next direction. The field is communicating through subtraction. You'll notice that what leaves often carries emotional gravity. It's rarely the insignificant things that fall first. It's the ones that anchor your identity. That's because quantum change doesn't start on the surface. It begins in the deep architecture of attachment. When you lose something you thought defined you, you're being invited to observe what remains when identification dissolves. That space, raw and unfilled, is where the new frequency can stabilize. If you resist, the pattern intensifies. You may feel as if life is stripping away everything simultaneously, but what's really happening is that coherence is seeking order. The energy that once flowed toward maintaining your old structures now needs redirection. When you release your grip, that energy returns to you. Suddenly intuition sharpens, random insights appear, possibilities you hadn't considered before start to flicker at the edges of awareness. This phase also reveals hidden dependencies, the subtle ways you outsource your sense of safety or meaning. Each loss exposes a reliance that had quietly governed your perception of control. When those external anchors disappear, you're forced to generate stability from within. It's the universe's way of teaching you internal gravity, so your future self can move freely without collapsing under external shifts. There's a moment, often unspoken, that arrives after enough things have fallen away. You look around and realize that the emptiness isn't hostile anymore. The quiet becomes fertile. You start to sense that what's missing is not absence, it's potential. The field begins rearranging, and you can feel it. Synchronicities increase, dreams intensify, signals multiply. The losses that once looked like endings now start to feel like openings. Still, the mind wants closure. It asks, when will something new appear? But the quantum field doesn't fill voids on command. It waits until your vibration stabilizes in acceptance, not in fear. That's why letting go isn't a single act. It's a frequency you hold. You stop asking life to return what it took, and instead, you start listening for what's forming in the invisible. And that's when the improbable begins to occur. Coincidences, alignments, numbers repeating, meetings that feel scripted by something larger. Reality starts to respond in patterns that seem almost impossible to explain. Because after every collapse, when loss has done its work, the field begins to synchronize. There comes a moment, usually right after the losses, when something strange begins to happen. The emptiness left behind doesn't stay empty for long. Out of nowhere, patterns start to form, numbers repeat, strangers echo your thoughts, and chance encounters seem to appear with perfect timing. You wake up at the same hour every night, check your phone, and see mirrored digits. You think of someone and they call. A phrase you just wrote shows up on a billboard 5 minutes later. It feels uncanny, almost orchestrated. And in a way, it is. Synchronicity is not superstition. It's the physical expression of coherence forming in the quantum field. When your internal vibration stabilizes after a collapse, it begins to attract external events that resonate with it. It's not that the universe suddenly starts sending signs, it's that your perception expands enough to register the hidden architecture of probability. What used to look like randomness begins to reveal rhythm. From a scientific lens, think of coherence as the moment when waves stop canceling each other out and start amplifying. Your thoughts, emotions, and actions align into a single signal strong enough to influence informational patterns around you. That's when coincidences accelerate. They are not just charming messages from the cosmos. They are feedback loops confirming that your inner field and the outer field are beginning to synchronize. You can test this directly. Observe the emotional tone right before a synchronicity occurs. There's often a brief pulse of clarity, a second of stillness in which you feel entirely present, not searching, not wanting, simply noticing. That microsecond of coherence is when reality rearranges itself. The universe doesn't need time to respond, it only needs alignment. When your awareness drops into that precise frequency, probability waves begin to crystallize into meaningful patterns. But here's the paradox. The more you chase synchronicities, the less they appear. Observation changes the field. When you turn them into a hunt for validation, your energy shifts from coherence to control. The key is to witness them without greed. Let them unfold as evidence, not proof. Proof belongs to the intellect. Evidence belongs to experience. And what's happening here is experiential. The quantum mirror reflecting the frequency you're becoming. This acceleration can feel intoxicating. You might start to believe you've unlocked a secret code, that you can manipulate reality by intention alone. But pay attention. Synchronicities are not the goal. They're the calibration beacons guiding you toward a deeper stillness. They appear most intensely when the field needs to confirm that your internal compass is aligned. Once stability is established, the signs quiet down again, not because you've lost connection, but because coherence has become normal. In practice, this is the phase where intuition begins to feel like physics. You know before you know. Decisions that once took days now resolve in seconds, guided by invisible logic. The distance between thought and manifestation shortens. The world feels alive with responsiveness, as if reality itself is breathing with you. This can be exhilarating, but it can also destabilize those around you. People who are still anchored in linear cause and effect may misinterpret your clarity as luck or delusion. Be patient. You're not meant to convince anyone, you're meant to keep observing the field without losing neutrality. When synchronicities multiply, they come in clusters. Each cluster marks a junction where multiple timelines intersect. It's the field's way of saying, a new reality line is available. Choose carefully. During these windows, choices carry amplified weight. What you focus on, even briefly, becomes instruction for the next iteration of your reality. That's why awareness matters more than action. The field responds to attention, not effort. If you pay close attention, you'll notice a pattern. After a burst of synchronicities, there's often a pause, a moment of silence as though the system is integrating data. This pause is not absence, it's recalibration. It's the energetic equivalent of the universe saving your progress before loading the next sequence. Many people mistake that silence for disconnection and panic, but those who understand the rhythm stay still, trusting the reset. Use these patterns as coordinates, not crutches. Each alignment, each improbable coincidence, is mapping your trajectory toward a higher coherence. The goal is not to collect signs, but to become the kind of consciousness that no longer needs them to know it's aligned. Because once synchronicity becomes your native language, the universe doesn't have to speak in numbers or accidents anymore. It speaks through your direct perception. And then, just when everything starts flowing again, when signals are clear and reality feels like it's singing back, you notice something unexpected happening inside your own body. The vibration that once expressed itself as coincidence begins to translate into sensation, fatigue, restlessness, strange pulses under the skin. The field isn't just communicating externally now, it's moving through you. When the field begins to reorganize inside you, the first thing it touches is not your mind but your biology. The body is the most honest part of consciousness. It doesn't argue, it translates. So when your frequency rises to meet a new state of coherence, your nervous system becomes the stage where that transition plays out. The symptoms appear without warning: fatigue that doesn't make sense, sudden bursts of heat, buzzing sensations under the skin, irregular sleep, waves of dizziness, moments of unexplainable elation followed by deep stillness. It's tempting to call it illness, but what's happening is adaptation. Your physical system is recalibrating to sustain a higher informational load. Quantum change doesn't happen in abstraction, it happens through matter. Every thought and emotion has an electromagnetic signature, and when those signatures shift, your neural network must literally rewire to accommodate them. Neuroplasticity isn't just a psychological term, it's the physical evidence of transformation. The brain dissolves old synaptic patterns and begins mapping new ones, but this process consumes enormous energy. That's why exhaustion is often the first symptom. The system is rerouting electricity, and the body asks for stillness so the rewiring can complete without interference. You might feel as though you're losing control of your rhythms. Sleep patterns break, appetite fluctuates, moods swing between extremes. What's really occurring is the release of stored charge. Each emotion you once suppressed has an energetic footprint. As the field amplifies coherence, it pushes out the frequencies that no longer belong. They move through muscles, blood, breath. Tears appear for no reason. Laughter erupts without context. Memories surface like bubbles from the ocean floor. Nothing is random. It's data being cleaned. The body is an antenna. Its sensitivity increases with each upgrade of consciousness. During recalibration, even light and sound can feel more intense, as if the world has been turned up a few degrees. You might crave solitude, nature, or silence. These are not escapes. They're environmental regulators helping your new frequency stabilize. The more attuned you become, the more clearly you notice what environments drain or amplify your coherence. Pay attention. Your biology has become your compass. At this stage, the most common trap is fear. The mind, seeing the body act unpredictably, assumes something is wrong. It wants diagnosis, treatment, explanation. But what's happening can't be reduced to pathology. Think of it as resonance testing. The field is determining how much voltage your system can hold. If you meet the process with anxiety, you contract, the signal scatters. If you meet it with curiosity, the field widens and integration accelerates. The difference between chaos and recalibration is interpretation. There's also a subtler layer to this transformation. As your body adjusts to a higher coherence, you begin sensing the emotions of others more vividly. Empathy sharpens into something almost electrical. You might walk into a room and instantly feel the tension before anyone speaks. This sensitivity is not weakness, it's an expanded bandwidth of perception. You're learning to read energy the way others read expression. The challenge is to stay centered enough that empathy doesn't turn into absorption. Grounding becomes a scientific act. Breathe deeply, move slowly, hydrate often. These are not spiritual cliches. they're physical protocols for voltage management. The fatigue that comes and goes during this phase isn't punishment. It's the pause between frequency shifts. Think of a tuning fork. Once struck, it vibrates intensely, then quiets just before the next tone begins. Your body follows the same rhythm. Each period of tiredness signals that integration is happening at a cellular level. Rest isn't laziness, it's synchronization time. When you resist rest, you interrupt the download. Sometimes, right before a major internal leap, symptoms intensify. The skin tingles, dreams become vivid, and time feels elastic. It can seem as if you're floating between two realities, the old one fading, the new one not yet stable. Don't rush the bridge. Breathe through it. The discomfort isn't a barrier. It's proof that the field is moving through every atom of your being, teaching your cells a new rhythm of coherence. And then, after the waves of exhaustion and sensation, something remarkable begins to happen. The noise inside quiets. The body feels lighter, cleaner, as if static has been drained from the system. The silence that once felt empty now hums with presence. In that stillness, isolation often follows, not as loneliness, but as an intentional pause from the universe itself. When everything around you slows, when people seem to step back and time stretches wide, it's not abandonment. It's preparation for the next stage of alignment. There comes a point when everything goes quiet. The noise of social life, the constant feedback loop of messages and plans, the sense of belonging to familiar rhythms, all of it seems to dissolve overnight. Friends drift away without conflict, conversations lose their spark, and invitations stop coming. Even the world's volume lowers. It can feel like the universe pressed pause on your existence. What once felt full now feels hollow, and the instinctive reaction is to fill that hollow with anything: work, distraction, connection, noise. But this silence is not a void, it's a chamber of recalibration. When the quantum field finishes reconfiguring your internal frequency, it isolates the system so it can stabilize without interference. You're being removed from old resonant patterns so that your new coherence can find its footing. Think of it like placing a tuning instrument in an anechoic chamber. No echoes, no distortions, only pure tone. The absence of external sound allows you to hear the true vibration of your own consciousness. In this phase, loneliness can feel amplified, not because you are unloved or unseen, but because the bandwidth of your awareness has expanded beyond its old environment. You are perceiving at a higher resolution now, and the spaces that once sustained you no longer fit your frequency. The field silences the outer world to make your inner voice unmistakable. Yet that voice doesn't arrive as words. It comes as intuition, stillness, and the quiet realization that presence itself is speaking. You might notice that your mind starts to panic in this silence. It searches for stimulation the way the lungs search for air. The mind has been conditioned to measure worth by activity and validation, but the quantum field measures coherence by stillness. The less you react, the more information you receive. Isolation becomes the microscope through which you observe the smallest vibrations of thought and emotion that used to go unnoticed. At first, the quiet feels oppressive. Days stretch, time slows. The familiar sense of identity, who you are in relation to others, begins to blur. This is not regression, it's purification. When the external mirrors fade, you meet the raw frequency of self without reference points. That encounter can be disorienting. It's not easy to face the parts of you that used to be drowned out by noise. But every time you choose to stay with that discomfort, you extract signal from silence. During this period, people often report hearing what feels like a new kind of inner music, a rhythm or pulse that doesn't come from the environment. That's your coherence stabilizing. The nervous system, no longer overwhelmed by external input, begins to attune to subtler frequencies. You may start to sense thoughts before they form, or emotions before they reach the surface. This isn't imagination, it's sensitivity evolving into precision. In practical terms, this is the ideal time to reduce unnecessary consumption. Less news, fewer conversations that deplete rather than nourish, minimal screens. When you allow quiet to dominate, your perception sharpens. You begin noticing micro-patterns in your environment, the timing of natural sounds, the rhythm of your breath, the subtle flow of energy between you and everything else. You start to realize that silence isn't the absence of communication, it's the purest form of it. As the days pass, something remarkable occurs. Solitude shifts from being a punishment to becoming a sanctuary. You no longer crave constant company. You begin to prefer the company of your own clarity. You find that the same silence that once scared you now feels magnetic. Within it, creative insights emerge unprovoked. The field speaks in whispers, but now you're quiet enough to hear. Still, this quiet can reveal shadows, old doubts, forgotten grief, unresolved memories. Everything buried under external noise rises to the surface. Don't interpret this as backsliding. It's the field emptying out low-frequency residue. Isolation is the universe's detox protocol. What you face now are echoes of who you used to be, seeking resolution. Breathe through them, observe without judgment, and they dissolve like static clearing from a signal. Eventually, you'll begin to recognize that the stillness around you has become a mirror. It reflects everything you need to see about how you create noise in your own life. Every moment of discomfort becomes an invitation to refine your internal tone. And in that refinement, you start to feel the return of coherence, the subtle awareness that the silence itself is alive. If you're here, in that in-between space where everything is quiet and you don't quite know who you're becoming, don't rush out of it. Stay. Let the silence teach you the frequency of your own truth. And if this message resonates, if you've been feeling this inexplicable isolation lately, take a breath, trust the process, and leave a comment with the words, "I'm listening." It's not just interaction, it's intention, a collective acknowledgement that you're hearing the universe in its most honest form. Because when you finally learn to listen within the silence, something begins to answer back. And that answer will come as the next evolution of your consciousness itself. After the silence settles, another wave begins, quieter, deeper, and far more disorienting. You start to ask questions that unravel the structure of everything you once believed to be true. They don't arrive like intellectual curiosities. They strike like tremors. Who am I really? What is my purpose? What if the story I've been living isn't mine at all? These are not questions you consciously choose. They rise from the center of your being, demanding honesty that the old self can't sustain. This stage feels like standing at the edge of a mirror that suddenly refuses to reflect. You've spent a lifetime identifying with names, roles, and achievements, yet none of them seem to fit anymore. You repeat your own story in your mind, and it sounds foreign. That's because your internal frequency has shifted so dramatically that the identity built on your previous vibration can no longer translate the new data. The person you think you are is becoming obsolete, and the mind, desperate for continuity, begins to panic. The irony is that this collapse of identity is the clearest sign that coherence is taking hold. Quantum change doesn't begin when you find new meaning. It begins when meaning itself dissolves. The old architecture of self must collapse before the new pattern can stabilize. What feels like an existential crisis is actually a systems update. The software of consciousness is rewriting its core code. During this period, the intellect will attempt to reassert control by seeking grand explanations. You might feel drawn to philosophies, religions, or scientific frameworks, searching for something that can re-anchor your understanding of reality. But none of them fit entirely. That mismatch isn't failure, it's calibration. You are moving beyond borrowed definitions into direct knowing. Knowledge is transforming into awareness, and awareness, unlike belief, doesn't need consensus to exist. Emotionally, this phase can be raw. There's grief in letting go of who you thought you were. Even illusions provide comfort, and losing them can feel like death. In many spiritual traditions, this is called the dark night of the soul. But it's less about darkness and more about sensory deprivation, the absence of familiar identity stimuli. Without the background noise of egoic certainty, silence becomes total. It's in that silence that a different kind of perception begins to form, one that observes rather than identifies. You may notice small moments of paradoxical clarity. Between waves of confusion, there are flashes of peace that have no reason. You catch yourself smiling at nothing, feeling vastness without context. These are glimpses of the observer emerging, the aspect of consciousness that remains untouched by the rise and fall of identity. The more you rest in that awareness, the more you realize that the one asking, "Who am I?" is the same one who has always been watching the question form. In this space, the ego often tries to rebuild itself through subtle disguises. It tells new stories like, "I am the awakened one," or "I am beyond the system." But these are just new costumes for the same mechanism of self-definition. Watch them come and go. The real shift isn't in adopting a new label, it's in recognizing that no label can contain what you are. You are the awareness behind all roles, not the roles themselves. From a physiological perspective, the body may also respond to this identity deconstruction. The brain's predictive circuits, which rely on familiar narratives to maintain stability, temporarily lose their reference points. This can trigger anxiety, dizziness, or a sense of being untethered from reality. But beneath the disorientation, new neural pathways are forming, ones that support flexibility, ambiguity, and deeper presence. Your system is learning to operate without the constant reinforcement of, "I am this." The danger here lies in mistaking questioning for regression. Many people interpret the loss of meaning as spiritual failure, when in fact it's a sign of maturation. The questioning doesn't destroy truth, it dissolves what isn't true. The field is not asking you to find new answers, it's asking you to hold the space where answers can't survive. That space is pure potential. It's where consciousness learns to exist without conditions. Eventually, the questions stop seeking conclusions and start becoming doorways. You begin to realize that "who am I?" isn't a riddle to solve, it's a state to inhabit. Identity becomes fluid, transparent. You no longer cling to fixed definitions, and in that openness, life starts revealing patterns that used to repeat endlessly, now in sharper relief. Because once the old identity loses grip, what remains visible are the loops, the lessons, the recurrences, the unresolved codes that have been running in the background all along. And that's where the next sign begins to unfold. The reappearance of familiar patterns, not as punishment, but as precision. Life showing you exactly what remains to be integrated before the leap completes itself. After the identity begins to dissolve, reality seems to play a strange trick. Just when you think you've outgrown the old cycles, the same challenges reappear. Different faces, same dynamics. A new relationship that ends exactly like the last. A financial pattern that collapses the moment you feel secure. The same emotional triggers, the same arguments, the same feeling of déjà vu repeating through new circumstances. It can feel like regression, as though you're being dragged backward into a life you already transcended. But this recurrence isn't punishment, it's precision. The universe doesn't repeat to torture, it repeats to clarify. Quantum change operates like a feedback loop. When you shift frequency, your field begins emitting new data, but the external world still carries echoes of the old pattern. Those echoes return not to test your worthiness, but to measure stability. The question isn't, have you learned, but can you remain coherent under the same stimulus that once fractured you? Repetition is the laboratory where integration becomes measurable. In scientific terms, think of it as a stress test. When a structure is rebuilt, engineers apply pressure to identify weak points. The quantum field does the same with consciousness. It recreates similar scenarios to confirm whether the new pattern holds. If the same reaction surfaces, fear, blame, avoidance, it's not failure, it's feedback. You're simply observing where old programming still hides in your system. The test continues until the signal stabilizes, until response becomes awareness rather than reflex. From a psychological perspective, these loops often highlight the last residues of attachment. The people who trigger you, the situations that exhaust you, the opportunities that vanish just as you reach for them, they're mirrors reflecting unintegrated fragments of self. The field has no interest in repetition for its own sake. It's an algorithm of coherence. Whatever isn't fully observed repeats. Observation, not resistance, is the solvent. You can feel the difference between repetition, driven by stagnation, and repetition driven by recalibration. In stagnation, the pattern feels heavy, like gravity pulling you down. In recalibration, there's awareness around it. You see the cycle while it's happening. You can almost sense the mechanics behind the emotion, as if watching an experiment in slow motion. That distance is evolution. The moment you can witness a loop without fusing to it, the loop begins to dissolve. Sometimes the universe condenses these repetitions into rapid succession, one trigger after another, each pushing on the same internal button from different angles. It's a compression phase, a final clearing before expansion. During these bursts, life feels like déjà vu on fast forward. Everything seems to circle the same theme, until exhaustion forces surrender. That surrender isn't collapse. It's the precise vibration that allows the loop to release. When resistance drops to 0, coherence rises to 1. Notice the language your mind uses during these cycles. It might say, "Why is this happening again?" But a more accurate question would be, what pattern is trying to complete itself through me? By shifting the question, you move from victimhood to participation. You stop being the character reacting to the story and become the observer decoding it. Each repeated situation becomes less about circumstance and more about resonance. The outer world is only showing you the echo of an internal frequency seeking resolution. On a biological level, repetition corresponds to neural reinforcement. The brain revisits familiar circuits until they're either reinforced or replaced. Each time you respond differently to a familiar trigger. Pause instead of react, breathe instead of argue, observe instead of collapse. You lay down a new neural pathway. Over time, the emotional charge attached to that pattern weakens. What once controlled you becomes neutral data. That neutrality is the real mark of transcendence, when the lesson no longer needs to repeat because it no longer defines you. Still, this process can be emotionally draining. You may feel like you're looping through endless revisions of the same chapter. But remember, the purpose of a spiral isn't to circle endlessly, it's to rise. Each return brings you to a higher vantage point, revealing the pattern from a new layer of understanding. What seems like going in circles is actually an upward helix of consciousness. The same event seen with deeper awareness becomes a different lesson entirely. Eventually, a subtle shift occurs. The situations that once triggered you lose magnetism. People who used to provoke reaction now pass through your field like light through glass. You no longer need to defend, explain, or prove. Reality begins responding to your steadiness instead of your struggle. The loop breaks not because the world changed, but because your frequency no longer resonates with the old version of the story. And in the quiet that follows, something else begins to stir. Dreams grow vivid. Intuitions sharpen into flashes of recognition. You start sensing things before they happen, as though information is reaching you from a timeline just beyond your current perception. The repetition fades, replaced by anticipation. It's as if the universe, having confirmed your stability, now opens the next layer of the experiment, communication through the field itself. After the repetition subsides, perception begins to stretch in ways that defy logic. You start sensing things before they happen, small flashes of recognition that feel less like thought and more like memory from a future already lived. You might wake up from a dream and see its echo hours later in waking life. Someone's name surfaces in your mind moments before they message you. Decisions feel guided by invisible coordinates, as if you're navigating from a deeper map. This isn't imagination, it's communication through the quantum field, the subtle language of intuition. At this stage, consciousness starts interfacing directly with information before it condenses into matter. The mind, accustomed to processing through linear cause and effect, finds itself bypassed. You no longer reason your way into choices, you know them. The intellect becomes interpreter instead of commander. Intuition, which once felt like an abstract concept, now behaves like a sensory organ. It speaks in frequencies, symbols, and sensations that your rational brain translates only afterward. The shift can feel disorienting at first. The boundary between dreaming and waking thins, and messages arrive through both. Dreams become cinematic, detailed, structured, sometimes carrying a texture so real that waking life feels pale by comparison. You might encounter recurring landscapes, teachers, or archetypes that seem to guide you through symbolic experiences. Each carries emotional data, coded in imagery. These are not random stories generated by the subconscious. They are transmissions from the informational field, translating themselves into language your mind can receive. Science calls this the preconscious phase of cognition, the milliseconds before awareness catches up with data. In quantum terms, it's coherence forming before observation collapses probability. Intuition is simply perception without delay. When you trust it, the delay between energy and experience shortens. You begin to live in a smoother alignment where synchronicity and insight merge into one continuous flow. The universe no longer whispers, it converses. But this communication demands discernment. Not every impulse is intuition. Some are echoes of old emotional conditioning disguised as guidance. The distinction lies in texture. Fear-based impulses feel urgent and narrow, as if something will collapse if you don't act immediately. True intuition feels expansive and neutral. It carries calm certainty without explanation. You can test this by pausing before acting on an impulse. If the sensation widens when you breathe into it, it's intuitive. If it contracts, it's reaction. Learning that difference is part of the training. This phase also intensifies your sensitivity to symbolic language. The external world becomes an extension of your inner landscape. The song on the radio, the phrase overheard in passing, the animal that crosses your path, all start forming a coherent narrative. It's not magical thinking. It's pattern recognition refined to a quantum scale. Your consciousness is learning to read entanglement, the way everything mirrors everything else when observed from coherence. The body continues to participate in this process. Subtle sensations become signals, a shiver, warmth in the chest, a tingling at the back of the neck. These are somatic confirmations, your biological field resonating with incoming information. The heart, with its electromagnetic power far stronger than the brain's, often acts as the primary receiver. When intuition arrives, it lands there first, translating vibration into knowing before the mind forms words. The more attuned you are to these bodily cues, the more fluent you become in the language of the field. Nighttime becomes a classroom. During sleep, the cognitive filters that manage daily life relax, and your awareness travels freely through probability layers. Dreams become rehearsal spaces for timelines, places where the subconscious and the quantum field negotiate potential outcomes. When you wake with an image that lingers, don't rush to interpret it literally. Ask instead what emotion or frequency it carries. Dreams rarely predict events. They translate energy into imagery. The accuracy lies not in the symbols, but in the resonance they leave behind. As intuition strengthens, the linear sense of time starts to soften. You might recall the future the way you used to recall the past. This temporal flexibility is a hallmark of expanded awareness, consciousness sampling multiple timelines simultaneously. It can feel like standing in the middle of overlapping realities, choosing which one to solidify through attention. The more you trust the guidance, the more effortlessly you navigate those intersections. Eventually, this sensitivity becomes second nature. You begin to recognize that you're no longer seeking signs. You're perceiving in a new syntax of reality. The field and your consciousness operate as a single circuit, exchanging information fluidly. This doesn't make life easier. It makes it truer. You stop acting from calculation and start responding from coherence. And yet, just as intuition deepens and connection intensifies, another transformation emerges almost paradoxically. You begin to detach. The very things you once clung to, control, certainty, even the need to interpret every sign, start to lose their gravity. The next stage unfolds when intuition matures into trust, and trust matures into release. It's not about knowing anymore. It's about letting go. There comes a quiet pivot point when everything you've been building inside, awareness, clarity, intuition, begins to express itself not through control, but through release. Without effort, without a plan, you start to loosen your grip on things that once felt vital to your identity. The approval you used to chase no longer excites you. The future you tried to predict loses its urgency. Even your own goals start to dissolve into something softer, more fluid. It isn't apathy, it's freedom. The spontaneous detachment that arrives when consciousness finally trusts the field. This is not a decision you make. It's something that happens to you when the frequency of fear drops out of your system. The survival mechanisms that once demanded certainty and control begin to fall silent. What's left is a strange peace, the kind that doesn't depend on outcomes. You still care, but without the weight of expectation. You still act, but without anxiety about the result. It feels like you're being lived, rather than constantly fighting to live. From the outside, it might look like indifference, but internally it feels like expansion. Detachment isn't the absence of emotion, it's the absence of possession. You experience love without ownership, success without pride, pain without resistance. It's as if the gravitational field of ego has weakened, allowing everything to orbit more naturally. You no longer collapse your identity into what happens. Events continue to unfold, but they no longer define you. Quantumly speaking, detachment is coherence without interference. When observation becomes neutral, probability lines stabilize faster. The less emotional noise you project, the more fluidly the universe organizes around your signal. This is why, paradoxically, things begin to flow effortlessly the moment you stop clinging to them. Desire transmutes from grasping into invitation. The field responds to clarity, not craving. Emotionally, this shift feels like an exhale that has been waiting your whole life to be released. The mind, used to constant effort, doesn't know how to interpret the stillness. It might even panic, trying to reattach to old sources of tension just to feel normal. But once you've tasted detachment, tension feels foreign, almost incompatible with your new vibration. You realize that peace is not something to be achieved. It's the default state revealed when control relaxes. There's a beautiful irony here. Everything you were afraid to lose begins returning in higher form. Relationships become easier. Opportunities arrive unforced. Solutions reveal themselves without overthinking. This isn't magic, it's mechanics. Detachment creates space for resonance. When you release the contraction of wanting, the field can finally deliver what matches your true frequency. You stop signaling lack, and the universe stops reflecting it. You'll notice that your perception of time also shifts. The future stops feeling like a destination to reach and becomes a texture within the present. You sense that everything you've been waiting for already exists in potential, and your role is not to chase it but to allow it to phase into visibility. That's why detachment feels so serene. There's no distance between you and what's unfolding. The observer and the observed begin to merge. On a neurological level, this corresponds to reduced activation in the brain's default mode network, the system responsible for self-referential thought. As that network quiets, the sense of me against the world dissolves, replaced by an expanded awareness of participation. You start operating less from separation and more from synchrony. This isn't a mystical state, it's neurobiological alignment with coherence. The brain, body, and field are finally playing in tune. Yet detachment is not the end of feeling, it's the purification of it. You still experience emotion, but it passes through you cleanly, like wind through an open window. Grief doesn't become suffering, and joy doesn't become addiction. Each feeling is a wave observed, not a storm endured. The absence of clinging allows emotion to return to its true function, movement of energy, not measurement of value. What surprises most people at this point is how natural it feels. Detachment isn't forced minimalism or avoidance, it's elegance. Life simplifies itself around you. You start choosing silence over explanation, quality over quantity, essence over noise. The world keeps turning, but you sense a new rhythm beneath it, as if existence has slowed down to breathe with you. And in that slower rhythm, a new kind of vision begins to open. The boundaries of self continue to thin until you can feel the pulse of connection in everything around you. Detachment doesn't isolate you, it integrates you. You start perceiving patterns that link every person, event, and coincidence into one vast choreography. It's the beginning of an even deeper realization. That consciousness isn't individual at all, but collective, interwoven, and infinite. That's when the expansion truly begins, not as a concept but as lived experience. The quiet neutrality of detachment becomes the gateway to something far larger. The expansion of consciousness itself, when the observer finally recognizes that it was never separate from the universe it's been observing. There is a moment, subtle yet irreversible, when you realize that everything, the silence, the loss, the chaos, the letting go, wasn't leading you towards something outside of you. It was leading you back into yourself. Expansion doesn't arrive with trumpets or lightning. It comes as an almost imperceptible shift, a widening of perception so complete that the boundaries of me and the world begin to dissolve. You start to sense that life isn't happening to you, or even for you, it's happening through you. Consciousness stops being a private experience and becomes a living field. At first, this expansion feels like light entering a room that has always been dim. Ordinary moments acquire extraordinary depth. You look at a stranger and sense their story without words. A single sound, a breeze, a pattern of sunlight on the floor can bring tears, not from sadness, but from recognition. The distance between subject and object, observer and observed, thins until you perceive the same intelligence moving through all things. You realize that everything you've ever encountered, the lessons, the people, the resistance, has been the universe conversing with itself through the language of your experience. In scientific terms, expansion of consciousness resembles what physics calls coherence across scales. Microsystems and macrosystems start resonating in harmony. Your personal field synchronizes with larger informational networks. This doesn't mean you merge into oblivion. It means your individuality becomes transparent, like glass through which universal awareness shines unobstructed. You are still distinctly yourself, but selfhood now feels more like a window than a wall. Emotionally, this stage carries a serene humility. The need to be right fades. The urge to prove, defend, or compare evaporates. You no longer chase meaning because everything already contains it. Even discomfort transforms. Pain becomes data. Confusion becomes wonder. You sense that nothing in existence is wasted. Every event, especially the ones you once resisted, was a movement of intelligence guiding you toward this exact state of comprehension. Expansion reveals that life was never random, only unrecognized. Time begins to behave differently. The past feels accessible not as memory, but as living frequency, and the future feels near, breathing inside the present. You experience simultaneity, multiple possibilities coexisting, all observable depending on where your attention lands. This is not a hallucination, but a recognition of how reality has always operated. Awareness becomes multidirectional. You can sense yourself living multiple narratives, and yet feel anchored in a still center that watches them all unfold without confusion. Language starts to fall short. Concepts like manifestation or enlightenment seem too small to contain what you feel. The expansion is wordless, a texture, a vibration that carries understanding without sentences. The more you try to explain it, the more it slips back into silence. So you learn to express it differently through simplicity, in how you listen, how you walk, how you inhabit space. Every movement becomes a quiet form of communication with the field. This is where gratitude emerges, not as a practice but as a reflex. You no longer thank the universe for giving you what you want. You thank it for being what you are. The distinction between giver and receiver collapses. Gratitude becomes the natural expression of coherence, energy recognizing itself. You feel a constant current of appreciation running beneath every experience, even those that once seemed unbearable. You begin to see that expansion is not a reward for suffering, but the direct consequence of perceiving suffering differently. The expansion of consciousness also transforms how you relate to others. Empathy evolves into resonance. You no longer just understand people, you feel them as extensions of the same field. Judgment loses its relevance because separation loses its logic. Conflict becomes communication. Differences become instruments in a shared symphony. You start to perceive the hidden architecture of connection behind every interaction. Even brief encounters carry the weight of cosmic precision. Physiologically, your body mirrors this expansion. Breath deepens naturally. The nervous system settles into a coherence that feels like quiet electricity, alert, yet at peace. You notice that healing accelerates, intuition sharpens, and perception widens. The body is no longer just a vessel, but a transmitter of awareness. When consciousness expands, biology upgrades to sustain it. Cells seem to hum in resonance with the vastness you now sense, and then something even subtler unfolds. You realize that the universe you once tried to decode is conscious of you too. Awareness isn't a one-way gaze, it's reciprocal. Every act of perception becomes a dialogue. When you look at the sky looks back. When you listen to silence, silence listens to you. This reciprocity is the essence of unity, the realization that there was never a separation between observer and observed. You no longer need proof that you've changed. The evidence is in your perception itself. The same world remains, but your experience of it has transformed so completely that it feels reborn. Expansion of consciousness doesn't grant escape from reality. It reveals reality's infinite dimensions. And just as you begin to rest in that vast awareness, you notice a final realization forming quietly, the truth that ties every sign together. The universe never changed. You did. The jump was never external. It was the observer who shifted, altering the entire fabric of reality simply by learning how to see. Most people believe a quantum jump is some mystical event, a sudden leap into a new world. But the real shift isn't in the world at all. It's in the observer. You didn't escape your old reality. You outgrew the version of yourself that created it. Every loss, every silence, every pattern was the field preparing you to see clearly. Expansion isn't about becoming more. It's about remembering what you already are. Consciousness, aware of itself. If you've made it here, you've felt the resonance of this truth inside you. To let me know you reached the end, write, "I'm expanding," in the comments. And if this message awakened something in you, stay with this frequency. Watch one of the videos appearing on your screen right now. Each one continues this exploration of how the universe transforms when you do.